So hi everyone, everybody that's on the webinar should be able to hear me okay, and you will be able to, if you unmute your mics, be able to talk to us as well. If you have any questions, you should be able to ask questions in the little bar there as well, so please feel free to do that as the presentation goes along. And we have started recording as well, so that will be available. James, would you like to do quick intro? Yeah.
Okay, good morning everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning for this SIORC workshop on the UK SIORC tagging program data. Just wanted to give a really brief introduction into the necessity of this project and why we're working with the Scottish Sea Angling Conservation Network and the Scottish SIORC tagging program to do this work. Recently the Scottish Sea Angling Conservation Network, who run the tagging program on elasma banks up in Scotland, took over ownership of the UK tagging data. Now this is a data set with thousands of records of elasma banks with mark and recapture ID undertaken by volunteer anglers throughout the UK. When we got hold of this data, the gentleman who's been running it for a long time sadly hasn't had much time to dedicate to it, and there's a lot of records that haven't been entered. There's a lot of inconsistencies in the data, which I'm sure Amie will tell us all about throughout the run of her talk. But we really saw an opportunity for this valuable data set to be all brought together and merged to have a UK-wide data set on elasma banks. And not only would this prove a valuable data source for the sharks, the skates and the rays around the UK coast, but it also proved the value of citizen science using volunteer anglers to collect this data. So we got some money from MASTS to hire Amie, who will now tell us what she's been doing with this data set over the last 3 months.
Thank you very much, James. So as James said, I've been working on this over the past 3 months. And just to give you a little breakdown of the workshop today, so we're going to start off just reiterating what James said and give a brief introduction. So this will be only a couple of minutes. We'll then have the first stage of the workshop, which will be about 45 minutes long, which will be talking about stage 1, which was the data standardisation process, and then stage 2, which was using QGIS and then putting some of the data in summaries. We're then going to have a tea and coffee break at around about 11:30, and then we're going to come back again after 15-20 minutes, and then we're going to talk about how the data can be used by 3 different stakeholders. And then we're going to talk with having further discussions on what can still be done with the data in terms of future progress, and then hopefully have discussion about that as well. So as James said, the UK SIORC tagging programme was by Dr. Ken Collins, but actually it was starting way back in the 90s, and actually as early as 1991 when it first progressed, and actually the programme was up and running by 1999. It was started by Sue and Jerry Drake, and they lived in Portsmouth, but they were mostly out catching tope in the Isle of Wight. And they decided that they wanted to know whether or not there was lots of tope there and where they were going and whether or not they were coming back to the same area. So they had this bright idea to tag sharks. And they wanted to do this for a number of species, but they wanted to get anglers involved because them themselves had a boat. But when they were applying for funding, they were advised they would need a scientist on board. So this is when they approached Ken Collins. Now, Ken Collins had already been tracking a number of animals at this point, so it seemed really sensible in terms of his decision to come on board with this project. But Sue and Jerry shortly after actually moved away to Africa for tagging sharks, and Ken actually took over it as the sole responsibility for the UK SIORC tagging programme. And he'd done that for a number of years. Unfortunately now, due to responsibility, he can no longer do that. But he did have student volunteers throughout his time at the programme, and they were the ones that were entering all the data on the database, and he estimated he was getting around 1,000 entries per year. And the students themselves would be able to use this data for student projects. But like we said, Ken no longer had the data, and in October of 2016, the Scottish SIORC tagging programme then took the database on. So stage 1 was the standardisation stage. This is how I received the data. It was in 4 different Excel files. Some had thousands of entries, up to just over 4,000, and some only had a good few hundred entries. And this was because each spreadsheet was split up depending on the tag number. So the first one, we had tag number starting from 0 all the way up to 9,999, and then it followed on from there. So it was actually quite easy to identify where the tag's original data come from because of this, but it was actually quite hard to handle the data because of this. It was hard to summarize it. So I made a couple of aims when we were doing this, and even though the key aims were making the data into a standardized format and to summarize that data on a platform, I also came up with some sub-aims throughout the process. So I first of all looked at all the variables that were in this data set, and there was lots. There was almost 60 variables, almost 70 variables. And we had anything from the lats and longs in the middle, which are fuzzed out because we don't want to give away people's marks. We have general locations, we have dates, we have time, we have the tagger, we have what bait was used, we have lots and lots of different variables. But in this format that's in at the moment, it was very inconsistent. So I decided that I would use the freeze the top row command and the filter command the whole way through this process to try and see if we could get a better idea of summarizing the data. And I identified 3 key processes, which was we needed to standardize the measurement parameters. We had to qualitatively quantify the location. So at the moment, and I'll show you in a bit later on, there was one location described in 5 different ways, and it actually became very difficult to understand what those locations were. So I felt like that had to be standardized, and I had to standardize the latitudes and the longitudes because they were all a bit confusing as well. The other things I looked at was duplicates, and also the species name, the dates, the sex, and the gravidity of the sharks were all inconsistent. So these are the 3 things in this 3-stage process that I felt were key to getting some quantifiable data. So like I say, the first thing I tackled was the measurements. So when I got the data, I had measurements in inches, centimeters, feet, and meters. And so my goal was to actually filter all of them just to having just centimeters as one column. So the first column there is total length in inches, and this is where all the raw data sat. I then looked through the data by plotting it and decided that if the centimeters come up, that could easily go into the centimeters column, and the same with meters. However, if it was just inches, I then used a formula to convert all of them to centimeters, so we had a raw column and the new centimeter column. I also did the same with weight. So I had a weight column, which was the raw data that we had, and then added 2 columns, the weight in pounds and the weight in kilograms. And this just meant that when it was kilograms, I could put it in the kilograms column, and when it was pounds, I could put it in the pounds column. And this was actually a lot easier to identify misreportings as well. I then decided that I was going to try and have some predicted weights. So a lot of the weights that weren't reported actually could have been predicted based on length weight parameters. So I used the weight to length equation, which is the weight is equal to the fixed parameter A times the length to the power of another fixed parameter. So this is some examples of how that process went. So bloody rough was something I found in the data set, and it came at the right moment because this is a very hard process. Because, for example, the first one was all starry smooth times here, and they had given 83, and it was assumed inches because no units was given. But that would mean it was over 2 meters long, which wasn't going to be the case. And this was actually not easy to identify unless I plotted the data. So I did plot the data so that we could easily identify outliers. Also, when I was trying to do a lot of things, I had to convert them as numbers because a lot of this was in as text. So it wasn't recognizing things I was trying to plot, which became a bit of an issue. So this is an example of the clean duck taupe males. So when I first got this data, all of the 250 centimeters were shifted far down to the right, and I had things in the thousands. So I went through and cleaned it all up, and this is as best as I could get with standard outliers. The curves that you see, the first one in the black line is the female standard length, and the smaller one in the grey is the male. So it kind of follows both lines quite well, but there is a lot of outliers. But I've just put this down to error of the fishermen. because when I was looking at the data, there would be no kind of conversion that could have been done that would make it lie better on the line. For the predicted weights, I got a few of my measurements from a number of sources. So the first source I used was the Scottish Sea Angling Conservation Network. They have their own length to weight graphs. So they already had a lot of the parameters that I was needing for certain species to be able to implement that equation. For individuals that they did not have on those weight to length, I used literature to try and find some, and also fish-based. Fish-based have a really nice bunch of parameters that you can get from there, and one of them is these 6 parameters for the length to weight graphs. But again, it was limited by data deficiencies. So when I looked up certain species, I was getting maybe something that was caught from down in the Azores area, but that might not have the same length to weight fixed parameter as something that was caught in another area. So I found there was a lot of inconsistencies, and when I then came to try and plot the lengths based on that, things weren't matching up. There was also a number of individuals, like for the shark fin mako, there was a weight given, and therefore we didn't need to have a predicted weight, so I left those out. So the second key stage that I had a look at was the locations. So I know I haven't put the lat long map, I've covered them up, but all of these are the same location. They have 2 miles east of Scares, which is in Luce Bay. We have Luce Bay. We have 2 miles off Luce Bay. We have East Harbour at Luce Bay. So they're all describing the same location, and they all have the exact same lats and longs. But it became very difficult to know that because when we filtered down the column, there was lots and lots of entries. So what I decided to do was add a different column and keep the original column. So we had our location area, so we knew it was all in Luce Bay, and any other detail that that tagger decided to give, I then filtered out. So the miles and the direction tended to be in brackets, and if there was a more general location, for example, Drummoor in Luce Bay, that was also inserted into the second one. And this actually made it a lot easier to then look at where the data came from, because when I used the drop-down menu for location area, I knew that we had lots from Luce Bay, and I knew that that was just from the one area and wasn't actually from multiple areas. So the final parameter I decided that definitely had to have a look at was the lat and longs. First of all, I decided to convert these to decimal degrees simply for ease when using QGIS. And also I had to check that the lats and longs that were given by each of the taggers were actually linking up to those locations. I'm not trying to insult your intelligence by putting a graph of what lats and longs are. I just wanted to emphasize that if you can actually maybe put one coordinate even wrong, it actually mucks up your location entirely. So I had a lot of errors, and this was a long process actually. So here's an example of a latitude. It wasn't one taken from the data, it was just one that I plotted out. And these were all the varieties I got in the data set based on that. So we had ones with perhaps a little hyphen put in. We had ones with an O put in for degrees. We had ones with a space, ones with a dot, one with a north. I even had a couple that had just a dot because in a few of them they assumed that they knew the latitude even though they didn't. So this actually became really difficult because when I plotted the data, I was finding that things where the dot was in the wrong place were coming up as on the equator. And that was quite problematic because when I first plotted it, I thought, oh, we found lots of sharks down in the equator, but actually it was just because it had been entered incorrectly. And now the reason it had been entered incorrectly is there was equations throughout to try and pick out data from its source. So when these were being converted originally, it was picking out data from the original degrees, minutes, and seconds column. However, they weren't always accurately picking out that data. So I really had to take a good study of the data to try and pick all these out. Also, the north side, east and westings actually were wrong on a few occasions. So there was locations that were based on the North Sea side of the UK, and the descriptions that they were giving me were based on the North Sea side, but they told me that the latitude and the longitude was coming from the west coast, and when I plotted it, I found land-based locations. So if I just removed it and made it an east coast location, to the east, and took away that negative, I was then finding they were in the right locations. And again, this just took some time because the find and replace element of Excel is very good, but it's not going to find inconsistent errors. So then that was the whole standardisation process of the lats and the longs. I had the same, again, like we say, with the westings and the eastings. So I then decided how would we be able to summarise this data, because even though I'd selected very general locations, I myself was still finding that I was writing maybe too specific. So even though I had the Isle of Wight, for example, I was also putting things such as Chelsea, which is very close to the Isle of Wight. So I wanted something a lot more general to be able to display this data on. So I actually selected the IC's major fishing areas to do that because it was a really nice way of subdividing the data. So here are just some other errors that I found in this first stage. So again, we have the top, which were already reported in centimetres. I had fractions in some of the columns instead of decimals, and this because Excel have actually a fraction option. And again, this was just a bit visually bad to look at when I was trying to look at the data. This tag number was actually a recapture tag, and the number was entered in wrong, and the only reason I realised the number was entered in wrong is because I was trying to look for the original tag number by filtering this guy's name. And this was another problem. This is one tagger, but his name has been duplicated so many times and spelt wrong in different directions. So it became very difficult when I was trying to find one thing in particular if I hadn't cleaned up this process. Also, dates became a bit of, not an issue, but they were very difficult because there was two columns, and we had the pure date column and we also had the year column, and I decided to remove the year column because I just felt like it was something that wasn't necessarily needed at that time. And when there was only a year given, I just stated that it was on the first day of the first month, so it was all standard. So the summary of stage one is that the find and replace command actually proved very, very useful, but there was a lot of limitations when doing that, and I actually had to all the way through pretty much check every line, and I had to consistently do that because otherwise I was missing things that Excel weren't picking up. Original data does still exist, so I did try to keep things very much consistent with how Ken gave us the data with respect to general locations, with having a lot of his variables in it also, because although we might not use it right at this moment, it might become useful in a later study. The key parameters are also in a usable format now, which is very useful when it comes to plotting because we can actually find things are more accurate now that the data is all being more standardised and cleaned. But there are still some caveats with the stage one process. So human error, there might still be the odd location that hasn't been cleaned up, and that's just purely because there was nearly 10,000 bits of data. And if the replace command wasn't doing that, and I couldn't find it, not immediately, but after all my checking, then it's going to be there. So the inconsistencies will still always exist as well. There was 250 data points removed from the database, which were actually put onto a separate spreadsheet, and this is because they were either land-based locations or that the reportings that they gave didn't make sense, so I couldn't include it in the second part of the analysis. But it does still exist, so we can still use the data at a later stage. Does anyone have any questions about that first part?
So you've actually got a data store which includes the revised data and the raw data still exists.
Yeah.
And then one thought would be, going forward, is there a plan to have, for example, an app whereby, so for example, inshore fishermen in various parts of the world can have apps where they record their catch quite accurately, and that automatically gives you a GPS location and timestamp as well.
Yes, yeah.
So is there a plan to maybe have an app that in the future anybody that's engaged in this tagging could just...
Well, that's something we've actually been looking at with SSTP, and a number of projects in Europe are actually doing it at the moment as well, because, like you say, it actually reduces the error because you're getting the lat long at that time, and it's actually easier for them to write in the parameters there and then, because these are the cards, and this is something I'm going to mention at the end as well, that we're given, and although this tagger has been very good at filling them out, a lot of people aren't, and while someone might not think, okay, time's not relevant, when I was doing this, time became relevant, really relevant, because there was a lot of duplicates, and I only knew there were duplicates because of the timestamps that was given, or the dates that were given, and so I would have had to have included them had they not been there. So actually I think that is a really good idea to use an app, and it is something we've talked about it with SSTP in the past. Yeah.
I think it's something we could talk about a bit further because we're already thinking about it for some other fisheries.
Okay, yeah.
And the other advantage with the app is you can photographs, and with the
Exactly,
species like the common skate where we're getting to the stage, and with Stephen Benjamin's over at SAMS of looking at photographic ID for marking and capture, it's becoming a potentially really valuable tool. I mean, the Shark Trust already have a sort of Sharks ID guide app, but it's not a tagging data app. But
I think that's something we could talk about because there may actually be fortuitously some funding within MASTS under a small grant scheme.
Yeah.
And there's what's called OPK, which is Open Data Kit, which is essentially an open source software for creating apps that appears to be fairly simple to use.
Okay.
So it may be worth thinking about.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's something we've considered for, but the biggest problem was the annual fee for Apple. We looked into the apps for Apple, and there's an annual fee which made at the time the whole thing a little unfeasible. But it's definitely something worth doing.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, I think in terms of the way forward, I think electronic use is a lot more reliable now. Well, it's very reliable now, but it's a lot more reliable in terms of data anyway. So I completely agree with you. Okay, so let's keep an eye on the time for everyone's tea and coffee. So we are now looking at stage 2 of the data set. So I'm just going to summarise what was actually in the data itself. There was 11 species that were included in the data, and there was one category I created which was unknown. One person just reported shark to me, which is, well, that's very helpful. It wasn't going to give me any detail on the actual species itself. So we had pressure sharks, we had starry smoothhounds, we had common smoothhounds, we have blue sharks, we have porbeagle sharks, common skate, taupe, lots of taupe. You'll see how heavy the taupe data is in a second. So we had 11 different species. Again, the data went from just under 10,000 to now only being just under 9,500, and this was because of the removal of duplicates and this second spreadsheet. There was actually a lot of duplicates, and this was one thing. While it wasn't time-consuming too much, it was very frustrating because it was quite hard to determine they were duplicates sometimes because of lack of data. We also have added 5 major fishing areas from ICES, and there's 40 subdivisions that this data includes. So stage 2 was the GIS and the summary statistics stage of the internship. So this is all the ICES subdivisions. So up in the UK and down in the Azores area, we have Major Fishing Area 27, and this is the Northeast Atlantic. But then we're also including the fishing area of the Mediterranean and down into Cape Verde as well. So this is actually all the data zoomed out, so we can't tell where everyone's fished them. But this is all the data that exists on the database and how widespread it was. So you can see from this table that taupe, we had over 6,000 taupe caught, and we had over 1,000 blue sharks, and the rest are kind of smaller as we go down. Sorry, not as we go down. So the rest are smaller, as the species are kind of smaller. So we do have actually quite a lot of big sharks being caught in this database, which is really useful, but we are really heavily biased towards the data we've collected on taupe. So I decided that because we have all this data on the different species, that I was going to make a map based on the species themselves. So the reds that you can see there are blue sharks, the orange kind of colour is the taupe, and the rest are given with the legend at the top. So again, we can see how heavy the data is with blue shark and taupe and the distribution. So we can see that blue shark are actually being caught in the Azores kind of area and even travelling further down south. So the furthest distance that was travelled from a tag and recapture is a shark that was tagged up in Cornwall, and this was in the August of 2012, was recaptured down all the way just off the coast of Africa in February of 2013. So we're not looking at a massive time span there of that travel.
Is that a blue shark? Sorry.
It was a blue shark, yeah. So this was the span of the data, how far the shark travelled, and I didn't expect it to be that short a time frame actually when looking at it. And this is just a map showing all the oranges display the tagged data and all the red show the recapture data. So we can see that all the recaptures are actually coming from further offshore and into the Azores area and down into off the coast of Africa. And most of our original tagging data is all coming from the UK, which is what we'd expect being the UK shark tagging programme. But we do find that we're having recaptures up north as well. So from my kind of basically putting things onto maps, I decided I was going to make summary sheets from all the data. So this is an example of a summary sheet. So what I did is I took each subdivision and made a 1A4 summary sheet of that subdivision. So this is IC's Major Fishing Area 27 and subdivision, the Bristol Channel. And it just is highlighted in yellow there what those lats and longs are incorporating. You then get a pie chart of the number of records from that area and the number of species, and then you get a percentage of what that area is made up of. So we can see that 70% of the tagging recapture in the Bristol Channel was made up of taupe. You then get a graph in the middle which tells you how many of those records were tagged and how many were recaptures. And you also get percentages at the bottom here of those two. So we know that within this area, 98.7% were tagged. You also get it subdivided into the species, so species into the whole kind of data set. So out of the whole, all of the records, only 2.4% of the Bristol Channel records were actually coming from the whole data set. I also did the same with species, so you get your species graph, and this is a bit different from the pie chart, because instead of percentages, it's telling you how many individuals were caught. So for taupe, we know that there was just under 200 individuals in this area. And you're also getting a summary of that here. So there were 161 individuals of taupe caught. From the whole of this subdivision, that made up almost 70%. Out of all the individuals of taupe caught, this subdivision took up 2.62 of those. And out of everything that was tagged and recaptured, it only accounted for 1.7%. So you're getting a big breakdown of how that is all contributed towards the data. Does that make sense? Yeah? I then did a secondary sheet, and this was by species. So within that Major Fishing Area 27 subdivision Bristol Channel, I then made each of the species have a link from that A4 page. So if you clicked on taupe, you would get this taupe A4, and there's only 2 graphs on it. And the first one shows you the graphs are broken up into female, male, and unknown individuals. And it is also displayed by month that they were caught. So in R, I extracted from the dates all the months that were the months that those fish were caught from the dates, and I plotted it on a graph. And we also have an unknown column. I did it at first without the unknown column, and then realised there was a whole bunch of data missing, and then realised there was actually a lot of dates missing. So we can see here that the females in this subdivision were caught around about May time all the way through to kind of September, and the same with the males and the unknowns as well. And it gives you how many were tagged or recaptured in that time.
Is there any way you can actually attach evidence to that? So in other words, can you get a proxy for the like, best time that's being used?
This is the problem, yeah. So when we look at the Azores one as well, I have that as an example. That was, you can see massive bias in terms of effort. So I know just for a fact with SSTP that they all mostly go out in the summertime to fish, and that's where all our data is coming from. And although it's great to say, oh look, we think they're coming here, well actually your effort's not going on in January, so they could be there at the same time. So unfortunately we don't have that data, but I appreciate that that's something you would want.
Having said that, the other, because a lot of the recaptures especially do come from Spanish longliners and other nationalities, there is a potential to at least look at recaptures in terms of effort. But then you still have that original issue with the anglers providing, the effort data is just
so. In terms of source then, database, maybe I missed that, but do you actually have a source, so in other words, commercial or recreational?
It's purely recreational anglers, and the only thing that comes back that can tag the recaptures come from commercial as well. So you'll see in the Azores that it's mostly Spanish longliners that are.
It's a locational thing most of the time.
Is it divided up on the database?
No.
Because most of the time it's not reported. Sometimes it's commercial fish market, but most of the time you just have to, it's knowing the data, knowing where the guys are going out, tagging and saying, well, if there's nothing, because these are small boats, the anglers are going out in small boats, so anything offshore regions is likely to be commercial. I think you could safely say that.
Yeah, and the only way, I guess, would be real time that you could determine that is I've got a few emails lately of someone that might have caught one off in the Bay of Biscay, for example, and they tell me where it was from. Some of them might not want to give those details also. So we do have a kind of good relationship in that respect, that some people do want to tell us, but not everyone will tell us because they might not want to give away that information. So really, but yes, effort is kind of a massive, so in one of the caveats for this is effort is a massive bias in that respect. You then also get a graph again with the female, male and the unknown split up, and then it's plotted this time with respect to the length of the fish. So we can see that in this subdivision the females were mostly 100 to 149 centimetres, and I find that this is quite a useful tool in terms of management, so we can see whether they're juvenile or mature individuals. Now again, this might be biased towards effort, because I know with the Scottish Shark Tagging Programme we don't tag fish that are less than a certain size, so again this could be biased towards effort. So some interesting ones that I found. This is subdivision, oh, what's that? There we go. So this is subdivision 7G. Now what's interesting is, again, it's towards effort and why we're finding so many in this area. So just below here we have a couple of islands where blue sharks are mostly being caught. So there was actually 331 blue sharks caught in this area, which made up 79% of those individuals within that sub-area. Again, yeah, H, we have a lot less individuals being caught. We only had 15 blue shark, and this is because we don't have so many people or anglers just coming off fishing there, because they're just recreational anglers. And even though blue shark made up 56% of this data, there was actually only 15 blue sharks there. So although it made up a big percentage, we're actually seeing the number of individuals caught lessen a lot more. This is actually 7E, mislabeled. And this is the English Channel, so this is the western part. And again, we have a couple of, just a little couple of islands and things coming up here. So we have people catching large number of blue sharks here as well, but also taupe species. So there was a massive split here as well. And this is the next most interesting thing, and probably one of the most interesting things that I found, was in subdivision 7D. So this is the eastern part of the English Channel. Out of, I think there was just under, there was just over, 939 females and 19 males and 6 unknown in terms of starry smoothhounds. So I started asking questions of why was there so many females in that area and a complete lack of males, because this actually made up most of the starry smoothhounds that were caught in the whole of the database. So I thought it was really interesting that it was mostly females being caught here. Maybe it was due to misidentification. Again, I don't know how we would mitigate for that, but it seems to me that there's lots and lots of females. So I thought this would be an interesting thing to take forward with respect for what we're So the summary of stage 2 is that the PDF formats were actually really useful because we weren't having to give away anybody's marks for anybody that wanted to have a look at this immediately without analysing the data. It actually highlighted a lot of patterns, which was really useful. But there was a few caveats, so it's highly biased towards effort was one that was popped up. It was a huge location biased as well. So even though that we saw a lot of recaptures were coming from the Azores, we weren't getting any people tagging from the Azores. So we didn't know if maybe the taupe were coming there at different times of year as well. Also, the PDFs were affected, but only if there was large numbers. So, for example, there was a few recaptures, and again, it could be down to misreporting, that were coming from just north of the Azores in a different subdivision, and there was only one there, and actually the graphs would only be telling you one thing for a specific species. So it was only more ideal when the areas were really concentrated. And so how we're just starting back for the second part. So this next part is only going to be about 15 minutes of me talking, and then we're going to open the floor up to discussions and things. We're also, so you can ask questions, feel free as you want to go, or you can pop a question in the question bar on the webinar page, and we can talk about that at the end or answer them at the end. So this section I'm going to briefly talk about how the data can be used now. I know we've actually talked about it as we've been going, which has actually been very helpful, and then we're going to go on to future progress and a little bit of a retrospective slide as well, and then we're going to open the floor up to discussion and things, because I know a lot of discussions can come out of this. So the first little look I had at how this data could be used is by scientists. So if we look at the data again, the basic spread of the data, we can see that we actually captured quite a wide range. I decided I wanted to actually focus on the Azores when I was looking at this, because I wanted to know a little bit more about the data. So this is a blue shark data, and the pink represents the female blue sharks, and the orange represents the male blue sharks, and the grey represents the unknown. And what was interesting to me is the Azores are actually got a mix of the two sexes, but when we look down just off the coast of Africa, we've got only female and unknown. But again, this is biased towards effort because we only have a few individuals from that area. But I thought from the data that was immediately obvious, it was quite interesting that we only had females down there. I then concentrated more within the Azores subdivision, more specifically 10A.2, because there's two areas in the subdivision, a regulatory area and a non-regulatory area. So I know that the span is pretty big compared, but just to give you an idea of how little individuals we have from this area. But one thing that's obvious, and again could be biased due to effort, is that all the individuals, with the exception of this unknown individual on the far right, was caught in August, but the rest were actually mostly caught very early on in the year or in December. So we see that a lot of them are caught in January, March and April time. Again, this could be biased towards effort, but it was interesting from the data that we did have that this was immediately obvious. And again, there was more females than males. I then took the Azores area and then subbed it for the Cape Verde area, and this is when the females in that subdivision were caught. So they were actually caught in July, August, and later in October as well. So I thought that they might be migrating at different times, but again, it's actually hard to conclude any of this because there is very, very little amount of data from these areas. I then did the same with the sizes. And one thing that's obvious about these areas is that they're not reporting the sizes either. So we talked about the app, and I think this would be really interesting with an app, because the fishermen aren't actually measuring them, because these sharks are probably being killed in long lines, so they're actually not going to take those measurements. But if they knew there was something they could upload those measurements to, and we got a good relationship with going with them, we might be able to get some more data from this area. And it would be interesting to see those individuals in the Azores, are they big females or are they smaller juvenile fish? And I think this would be something that would be quite interesting to take forward. I have looked a bit in literature about this as well. Again, this is down in the Cape Verde area, and we see that we had one female that was greater than 200 centimetres, so just over 2 meters, but we didn't have a lot of data from that either. So I thought it would be really interesting for scientists if we could develop our relationships with people to try and get more data from it, and it might be interesting to get more parameters, for example, like water temperature and things from this time of year, because it might actually, we might be able to get more behavioural kind of conclusions from this if we had looked a bit deeper into it. So the second stakeholder I thought might be interested in the data was Scottish Natural Heritage or Marine Scotland Science. And this is because the Scottish Shark Tagging Programme also has a database that exists with this kind of data. But what is interesting is the species difference between the two data sets. So up here in our data set, we have a lot of common skate and we have a lot of taupe. So 2,000 taupe that came from this data set were actually caught just in the Irish Sea, but off Lewis Bay, so it is still within Scottish borders. So what might be interesting for SNH is when it comes to things such as monitoring techniques, or for terms of setting marine priority features, it might be very interesting for them to have this data set, because there is data being caught within Scottish waters here. Also, they're migratory species, so we do want to not just have our Scottish view about it, but we want to know where they're going elsewhere in the UK and the Bay of Biscay and the Azores. So I think that incorporating the data into the two will be it is a very useful exercise, and I've already started doing that at the moment. So even though the subdivisions only categorise Irish Sea and Scotland in the North Sea, I've started setting out different subdivisions for within Scotland because they're not differentiating between things such as maybe the Clyde or the Isle of Mull. So I've actually started the process of those location subdivisions for within Scotland. Another person that I think, or persons, would be very interested in this data set is the anglers themselves. So it's actually really important to collect data like this for the anglers to be involved, because citizen science wouldn't have happened in this respect without them. This is me fishing. So when we're fishing for common skate or tagging common skate, I think education is really key for the anglers. They want to know where things are going and what they're doing. And this can help advise them on gear sizes, so they could look at those PDF formats and not knowing that certain species were caught in that area where they were, or not know exactly how many there was. So it might be really useful for anglers to use because they could choose different gear sizes, especially if they didn't realise that the bigger species were actually coming more into their area than they thought they were. It would also encourage a citizen science-based project, for example, the use of an app, for example. They would want to submit the data there, and it also gets the word out that programs like this are happening so people can engage more, because actually some people that are regularly visiting sites will be able to tell you far more than one person that's going there wants to just collect a little bit of data. So it's actually really helpful if we do have the public and citizen science involved as well. So those are the three cases I thought could use the data, but obviously that needs to be explored a lot deeper. But I have some retrospective. So what worked well? I think actually having this internship as a three-stage process worked very well. Tackling first the database solely on its own helped a lot because you weren't then trying to look for different ideas as you were just trying to standardise a data set. But at the same time, it would have helped if I'd moved to the GIS process a lot quicker than I did, because I could have identified reportings that were on land or reportings that were maybe had the wrong latitudes and longitudes a lot quicker than I did, because you can just plot it in a map and see they're wrong. And I restrained myself from doing it as much as I wanted to, so that I did just get stage 1 done. So in retrospect, maybe I should have just plotted it just to have a little look at the data first. So, this is what I thought. I thought I did love Excel in the beginning, but after a little while it all got a bit too much. And like we say, because there is 10,000 bits of data, Excel has now started crashing a lot. It will do things very slowly now. Things took a lot longer towards the end, just purely because of the magnitude of data that was involved. One thing that I did learn to do, which I think is very useful, is the data set in Excel is now set up. So if you filter, for example, taupe by female, a graph will come up showing you the length to weight and parameters for that, and you can get that for all the species. So that's something that's really useful on the data set that I should have mentioned earlier on. So there's a number of things that we can still do and still be learned. So we talked about the three stakeholders that might be interested. It would be very helpful, and in my head I thought I would be able to do this at the time, but to have it on a web-based server. So QGIS have something called QGIS to Web, which is a different version of their old plugin that was like a leaflet format. And this actually allows you to put your data on the web if you have a web server, and you can display your data very, very easily that way. And I looked at a couple of examples, and if you were to click on the polygon, for example, we could have those PDFs but in a more of a summary format and a lot more data being output that aren't just in lots of different sheets. So you can display the data a lot more visually appealing that way, which might actually get people to engage a lot more. So again, the consideration that we do have to merge it with the Scottish Shark Tagging Programme. I know in the remit we originally wanted to do this, but because of some other limitations that hasn't been able to happen. But I have started the process of subdividing the Scottish data so that we can start to merge the data together. Because I think that for species such as taupe that are more migratory, it will help a lot more. Also for things such as maybe the common skate, for example, if this common skate, because of the MPA, might be rising in numbers, we want to see where they're now appearing in the UK database as well as the Scottish database. So hopefully that will, merging those two together will be very useful with respect to both science and to management. And that's something that I really want to do in the future. But now I think we should open the floor to some discussion.
Yeah, well done.
If anybody wants to speak, just unmute yourselves. I've managed to unmute most people. Some people are unmutable. So if you need to speak, please just unmute your microphone.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, it's Sean Ashworth from Sussex Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority.
Hi, Sean.
In England, down in the south. A quick question. Is it possible to interrogate the data a bit more that's down in the Eastern Channel?
Yeah, 100%. I spoke to James quickly about this in our break, and there is a lot of areas down in Isle of Wight and Utopia and spoils grounds, and there's a lot of data from there, so it is possible to explore that even further. And the reason that I made all those location subdivisions is they are now subdivided. So the Isle of Wight is one subdivision. We also have Utopia as another, because I know there are very specific areas in that respect. So definitely there is scope for that.
That's great, Amy, because I don't know if James mentioned, but we're looking at fisheries management on Utopia here, and we were wondering where to go for evidence, and it seems that we've hit the jackpot really with you guys.
You have a ton.
So we'll keep that conversation up with James and yourself. Are you carrying on working after this, or is this your...
So I work for the Scottish Shark Tagging Programme anyway, so that's what I was helping this through. So I can stay on just for knowledge of the database more than anything with James, if that helps.
Yeah, that's great. So we'll carry on our conversation with yourself and James. Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, no worries, Sean. That's perfect. And as I said, I think there's definitely a lot we've got that we can help you with on that one. So.
Yeah, thank you, James.
No worries.
Okay, any other questions? We will actually, there's a recording of the webinar, and that will go onto the MASTS website possibly in the next week or so, but we'll alert everybody once it goes live.
Okay, great.
So what's your next step from here?
Next step from here.
It's a legitimate point.
No, the sort of idea for this data, so the UK shark tagging programme has been going on for a while, as has the Scottish shark tagging programme, which has incorporated other tagging programmes such as the Glasgow Museum, which has data going back to the 70s on taupe and common skate from the sort of Isle of Mull, Firth of Lorne area. But it's very apparent looking at the spatial scale of this data, we're talking Europe-wide, if not sort of North Atlantic-wide, that having tagging solely in the UK is missing out on a lot of the picture. So the idea was to try and get this data into a state where it produces an almost sort of online showcase of what we've achieved so far with it, and say appeal to the wider NGOs, volunteer anglers, research scientists, and say, look, this is what the data can do, but if you start tagging at the other end of the migration range, the Azores, the Canary Islands, Africa, even in the Mediterranean, we have some connectivity there, as well as the sort of countries bordering the other side of the North Sea, Holland, France. Let's get an almost European tagging effort going, sort of a European shark research thing. And there's lots of researchers doing all this, and we know that there's guys in the Bay of Biscay that are marking animals, but obviously that tagging data isn't it's not all being linked up.
So maybe one way forward might be to actually establish, if you could establish a standard app for the collection of data that could be used in a number of different languages, and a standard protocol for its use, and then really try and get that adopted on a broad scale.
And we need that central web server to kind of host it all as well.
But that may be a way of trying to draw information together.
Absolutely, because
it wouldn't actually cost that much to do.
No. There was one recapture from Holland there, and like you say, that we know that Holland are tagging, so it's just that on that map it looks like there's none, but actually we know there is stuff there. So it's just like you say, putting it together as opposed to having different projects that are maybe thinking they're missing data when they're not.
Basically stopping people thinking of individual tag mark and recapture projects and saying, look, if you contribute to this, then you have access to something a lot wider. But at the same time, it's pooling everything, so there's not all these piecemeal projects going on everywhere. It's a kind of centre for mark and recapture data. I mean, there's certain telemetry projects around the world where they have tracking data.
You could also potentially, for the funders, so whoever the major funders are, try and seek some sort of a formal agreement if they're going to fund a tagging program, that there are basic standards that they should operate.
Yes.
And a quality control system, and that way they will be duplicate funding, and they will also hopefully collect data that can be additive rather than.
Absolutely.
So that may be another sort of list of thing to add to your list is trying to seek agreement amongst all of those NGOs and potential funders for a common data standard for collection of data.
Have you do overhauled links, I guess, in Northern Ireland as well to get?
Yeah, there was actually a few tags that came from
Ireland itself.
From Ireland, Ireland, Northern Ireland.
It'd be good to bring that
But again, they're very keen on, we've got our database, we want to analyse it, and we talk, do you want to merge into it? They're like, well, we would like to, but we want to kind of underline what we've done by ourselves so far.
I think it's, these things will happen naturally, but I mean, I think the next step is also to showcase the case studies you've got to say, here's what we can do. And one thing that really flagged up for me is the link up with the Earth observation systems, GEOS, and people like that who can do all the satellite oceanographic measurements at massive scales and just pull it in. And that's what the EO Full Wildlife Project's doing. It's bringing in massive environmental oceanographic data that you can map to track, whether it's turtles or marine mammals or sharks. And there's big pots of money here and there for that as well. We're still part of Europe, and we can still apply H2020 money for stuff like that as well. So the potential to overlay that kind of data with oceanographic, massive scale collections is really good.
That's what I thought, because when I thought about temperature and things, I thought it would be very useful just to very quickly map that over, even though it would be easy to do coarsely, but very neatly and something that would be able to keep going as data was being collected.
And I mean, I've got data we could try to play with just to see from like the 1970s right up to 2011, from sea floor to what's the other part of the ecosystem called the surface. I'm used to working at the bottom. but we can show the temperature changes as well. Now, you didn't take a year, did you? You said at one point you took out...
I took out year in the database, but I can add it back in very easily because I added in month, and I realised when I was analysing that would be a lot easier to have. And it was just because when I was dealing with it, I was trying to find blanks, and that's why I took out the year. But very easily in R, I can add it back in it because you just extract the data.
So we should, not that we can come back to Mark's point now, but having a year and then start to think about longer term trends and shifts. We've suddenly seen a bunch of angel sharks pop up somewhere.
Absolutely.
You will, but
data in you use the oscillation, North Atlantic data for the spur dog stuff and frontal systems. The basket shark migration seems to be very frontal driven. I mean, moving aside from sort of web-based tools, getting some student projects going on this kind of data to start looking at these things would be really useful.
Just a thought, for each of the vessels, do you have a vessel name?
Yes. Yeah.
So if you've got a vessel name and you've got what's called the MMSI number for that vessel, and if it's a commercial fishing vessel, and it's or it's a passenger carrying vessel, then it should be carrying AIS. AIS data is something we can harvest.
Not all of them have it. I mean, some do, and there is a chance to look at that, but a lot of them.
It's a good start.
It is.
But it's basically free data. Or it's data that you can purchase. And it may be something that you might be able to start using just to serve again an MLOOK proxy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, again, you're looking at the volunteer anglers. There's a kind of combination of charter skippers and recreational anglers. Now, the recreational anglers you have no control over, but the charter skippers, again, they don't carry IAS, they don't carry any kind of logging system, but obviously weather dependent and things throughout the course of that year, they can give you estimates of days at sea. And again, they're going to be, okay, you could use something with a proxy. Obviously, you're going to have large error margins on that as the years go on, but you could get some form of proxy as an effort for the charter data. And you can distinguish the charter from the non-charter data because you've got things like vessel, like most of the charter skippers go either a vessel name or just the areas they're fishing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But even if you could maybe establish sort of a sentinel vessel scheme where you have, you can statistically work out where you've got your recreational, not recreational, your commercial skippers, and look at whether you could actually get some sort of sentinel scheme where they are supplying you with, in effect, quality control data. And that might be worth a thought.
Absolutely.
We discussed this early on, but one of the main purposes of this as well is also to incentivize anglers to keep putting in data, because
Yeah.
he was concerned. I think deposition was sort of dropping off. People were saying, what's the point? Have you thought about ways to showcase this better to them and say, look, here's what we're showing? Is there anything planned with the SACN or anyone to show that?
So with SSTP itself, it's been a difficult hurdle because with SSTP we're having to reduce the number of anglers that we have anyway, based on quality control, because of standards. So there's been a little bit of backlash because of it. So we're basically developing so that there's a standardised course. It's a bit more vigorous in the respect that you'll have to attend a day's, workshop, and it's just purely so that we can.
Once it's standardised, there's no reason why we can't host these kind of workshops if funding was available around the UK.
I agree. So SNH, I kind of said to them, that anglers really want something back. So even something really simple I started was a Taggers Monthly with SSTP, and it just displayed what we were doing a lot more, and it can tell you some more interesting data points, and it's something that actually they're engaging well more in because they're just getting a little bit more feedback than they used to.
I mean, at the end of the day, the guys who are tagging are the guys who have a real interest in this, and their interest is where are their fish going? Are they going to recapture the same fish? The backstories behind their fish. They want to know if it's recaught in the Azores. They want to know if the fish they caught comes.
Yeah, and that's why there's a recapture feedback scheme, which is really useful. But if you're not tagging very often, it might be more useful for you to see someone else's, not data, but maybe more useful to see the data in some sort of sense.
Beautiful.
Just see everything. Is that still on?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, did anyone have any comments? I mean, Stephen, if you're still online, in regards to the sort of idea of an app-based photo ID thing. I mean, obviously for skate at the moment, but with species such as maybe the starry smoothhound or the spur dog that have white patterns, I mean, do you think that there's any potential there? Okay. And if anybody does have any questions, they can email Amie.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
then that can be circulated to the group. So
my email's up there. If we just move that to the side so you can see it. Yeah, perfect.
But, I mean, obviously this is just the beginning. I mean, it didn't quite come across in Amie's presentation, but the sheer scale of cleaning that data up was really quite awesome. So well done, Amie. And I do feel that, with nearly 10,000 records, and there will be over 10,000 records once that's fully merged with the Scottish tagging data. It's going to be a really valuable tool if we can also pull together and make the use of it with adding in a load of maybe environmental data like Leanne suggested, having some sort of web-based tool where people can access the data at various levels based on logon and credentials. And I think it could be really an exciting tool to take forward with tools like apps based on there and other things as well. So.
The only drawback with the merging of SFTP is purely duplicates, and that's it. Is there'll be duplicates from specifically more in southwest Scotland because that's where a lot of our data comes from. We'll get more data from the Isle of Mull, for example, and the only other, I guess, drawback is that we don't have as many variables as in this data, but that's fine.
That's not a problem.
So yeah.
Perfect. Well, if nobody's got any questions or are unable to ask questions by email, I'd like to say thank you very much. Firstly to the MASTS forums for funding this work, and also to Amie for her hard work over the last 3 months. So thanks very much, and thanks for
everyone.
clapping in this morning.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to sign off now.